In the vast expanse of nature, in process, in faith and trust and wonderment, we give ourselves to this suchness, the seamless mystery of birthing and dying. Spacious, loving, with feet solid in the earth, we nurture the hints at blessedness, the myriad faces and masks of luminous knowing. Moving as this flow of compassion and deepening inquiry, we engage with all beings in ways that support the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the entire field of life and living. For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness. Sadhana. So I'd like to just start the retreat and this morning by giving a kind of more general, very general kind of orientation to how I view this work. A number of people have referred to the Samantabhadra retreat, and it's quite possible that this will be referred to later on as the Samantabhadra retreat. But I'd like to just say that I don't really see it as the Samantabhadra retreat. In a sense, it's an exploration of life and living that's beyond any words, right, to kind of accurately nail it. In one sense we could call this the heart of Mahayana. And if you think many of you have sufficient Buddhist background to be familiar with terms like Hinayana and Mahayana and Vajrayana. And, they're often thought of as schools or, vehicles or something like that. And, they even locate them sometimes, so Hinayana is kind of generally in Southeast Asia, and Mahayana is kind of northern India and going into China, and Vajrayana is sort of in Tibet and in bits of Japan, and so you've got these kind of very specific vehicles which belong to Buddhism, and so everyone knows what we're talking about. But imagine for a moment that we could look at these terms not as referring to schools or locations or anything like that, but they're referring to the normal progression of expansion of living that a human being experiences in the course of being born and growing up and maturing as an adult and so forth. And so, we wouldn't have any kind of derogatory comment to make about the fact that a 3-year-old is not particularly considering what Donald Trump's doing, right, and having any relevance to their life, right, or that the rainforests are being cut down or burnt here or there. It's not a flaw on the part of the 3-year-old, right? They have a smaller view, right? This is Hina, they move in a smaller view, and this smaller view is relatively exclusive. It's me and my immediate family, right? You get a sense of this, right? It's small in the sense of the sheer kilometerage of extended world beyond their skin is smaller, right? This is in which you operate, and there's, we don't think there's anything wrong with the child, with the young. Oh, some adults unfortunately do, but if you're in a reasonable space, you don't hold it against the child when they get into that's mine and that's yours phase. Right? You know what I mean? It's a natural part of growing up, and this, it's like the human being in the course of learning to identify themselves as a being and a person living somewhere and doing something. This is absolutely essential for a healthily operating human being. If you don't develop a sense of self and a sense of boundaries and so forth, you don't operate. So it would be bizarre to say that, oh, well, it's all shunyata, it's delusion and so on. What's the matter with it? Like, children are kind of deluded humans, but eventually they'll see. Adults get to see. Right? But think of Hinayana as, in a very kind of broad sense, it's identifying a kind of stage of maturing in the human journey. Right? And I've met people from this perspective who live and practice and study within a cultural frame of Tibetan Buddhism, who are operating in the Hinayana mode of operation. They're concerned about me and my position, and that's yours and that's mine, and I want to be free, and I want to get off the wheel of this, and I want it my way, and I want it all to be nirvana, right? And I'm going to abandon samsara, and it's like basically kind of me, and we can have this very natural childlike stage continuing into an adult body. Right? That's when it gets a bit of a problem. But Hinayana in itself is neither positive or negative. It's just there in its place. It's absolutely necessary. Right? But then if you look at the natural growth of a human creature, right? We have an expansion. Right? We learn mum and dad, and then this horror, brother and sister come along if you're the older one, right? Right? So you have a kind of expanding family, and then you got uncles and aunts, and then you've got friends who aren't family, right? And then you kind of live within a close-knit culture, right? Everyone's got a similar color skin maybe, and then suddenly you meet people with different color skin, right? And you go, oh my God, there's, what's going on? And you have to kind of adjust. And some people adjust in a way that opens up, right, and embraces this. And there's a constantly, almost like refreshing view of oneself. I don't mean, it's refreshing. I mean, it's like being refreshed. You know what I mean? Like in the process of our expanding living, our sense of what we are and what others are also expands, right? It changes as we live. And so, I'm going to continue with this theme, but just hopping over to the other side, the sadhana of Samantabhadra. Sadhana is often translated as practice, but for me this could be the practice of, this is actually the sadhana of Mahayana, right, that we're looking at, right? Or the sadhana, because it can't be pinned down, we could call it the sadhana of suchness. It's kind of like I don't think you are, but don't allow yourself to be seduced into thinking that we're actually here studying the practice of a visualization of some strange white female in kind of weird, dubious cohabitation with some dark blue male, right, sitting on a lotus throne with lots of Tibetan seed syllables, right? Because that's not what I think. This is not what I think I'm trying to teach, right? It's tremendously, symbols help, right? Because in a symbol, when it's a good symbol, it can invite many levels of understanding, right? That's why poetry is, right, the power of poetry, if you like, and sort of visual poetry. But so if we think of this as the practice of this Mahayana, I mean, how is Maha normally translated? Great, isn't it? Sort of great vehicle. Not so many people who are quite used to the term Mahayana realize that actually, if you look it up, Maha in the Sanskrit dictionary, it also means magnanimous. And it also has a sense of radical inclusivity. So we're talking about a vehicle of magnanimity, there's more to it than just big to me. Like magnanimous has a sense of extraordinary, unending generosity. It's kind of like just flows out, right? And radical inclusivity seems to indicate a capacity to to find a place for everything that arises in the universe of your living experience. Rather than saying that one doesn't belong, I get rid of that part. No, I'm determined to find a way of integrating this. Right? The good, the bad, and the ugly kind of thing. Right? So it's just like quite different from in the kind of smaller vehicle. Our attitude is more, well, I want to get rid of the stuff I don't like, right? Or control it, or get away from it. And there's often a sense of getting away from where I am to somewhere else, whereas in the magnanimous vehicle, it's like, boom. Right? I mean, for me, the word magnanimous also has a sense of a generosity that's flowing forth from a being or a presence or something like that, that itself is feeling very wealthy and well-grounded. You know what I mean? So that it's not even like they're not even giving, it's just that's what they do. They just overflow, you know what I mean? It's like magnanimous, it's like, it's not like an effortful generosity, or I'm being generous here and I'm being generous there. It's just, could you, sure. Would you mind, sure. It's kind of like, great idea, let's go with this, right? And so we have a sense of a sadhana of this kind of magnanimous mode of being. It's a sadhana of radical inclusivity. Right? It's a sadhana of fundamental love and clear seeing. And then the word sadhana, is just like often gets translated as practice. And I take wobbles with this word practice, because I think for a lot of people there's a kind of subliminal, if not really strong association with the word practice that goes along with someone who's not very good at something. So you practice it, you practice something because you're not very good at it, you know what I mean? Like, so that you can get better at it. Otherwise, why bother practicing? I don't need to practice, I can do that. Right? So practices are for beginners, but we don't really mean beginners like some of you have said. We're not talking about beginner's mind, right? We're talking about just sort of people who don't know anything, right? Right? Inexperienced. You have to do this kind of dismissive gesture to get the feeling for what I'm talking about. Right? And so, we have a sense of practice like this, and then, it gets even worse. The sadhana is, for many people, although it's a word that's used in many different religious traditions in East Asia, for many people here, right, we have an association with it like the sadhana of Chenrezig and the sadhana of Vajrasattva and the sadhana of Tara and the sadhana, and we've got it really tied up with a very particular kind of meditation practice that involves prayers and meditations and step 1 and then step 2 and step 3 and then the dissolution and then the this and then the that, and that's a sadhana. And I do the sadhana, practicing the sadhana. But actually, strange that you would practice the sadhana, because sadhana means practice. So it would sound goofy if you were saying, well, I'm practicing the practice. Right? But maybe not so goofy. Right? In kind of more academic European usage, there's a word that is less known in a sense in kind of general conversation in New Zealand today, but it's praxis. Right? And they would say praxis, which is Praxis, praxis. Right? And it translates as practice. That's what it means. But it's a very different way of looking at the practice. A praxis is like a discipline that you're engaging in And as Namjal used to say, a discipline is nothing to do with whips and early morning bells, right? Discipline is actually a kind of a warpage of a verb, right? And it goes, a discipline is really discipling, and discipling is studying, right? So we're entering into a studying of life, studying itself, right? And so this is the kind of, it's a discipline, it's a study, right? In which the thing that we're studying, in which we are studying something, and through studying this something, we are transformed through the study, which then changes our sense of what we're studying, which then transforms us who's doing the studying, right? And it's a kind of circular, if you like, right? And this is a praxis. Right? And so, in a sense, this is quite different than am I doing the practice correctly? Right? So you can describe the correct practice as to sit down this way, take up this posture, do these prayers, do this kind of bodily thing, do this mental thing, do this speech thing. And you're concerned, am I allowed to visualize it? It says, spontaneously above my head. Yeah, but it comes a little bit lower than above my head. Is that okay? Or, what happens if Chenrezi's behind me? I mean, does that show some kind of bad karma? Or, I had this vision of sitting on top of Chenrezi, and I don't want to tell anybody about that. It's like, because you're not doing the practice properly, and don't muck around with the practice. Right? It's important to do the practice correctly. Right? I mean, this is the kind of associations that often, I'm not saying that you necessarily are rooted in this, but I'm sure that if you don't have any of this going right now, I'm absolutely guessing that sometime in your life you have had something like this going. This is not uncommon in our culture. And so, when I talk about the practice of Mahayana, I mean, what's the correct practice of Mahayana, and doing it right or doing it wrong, right? But the praxis of Mahayana, right? The praxis of suchness involved in exploring the suchness and transforming through the suchness, right? And in the Mahayana tradition, right, of Buddhism, there are a whole lot of very, very famous, almost like seminal texts. And one of them is the Avatamsaka Sutra. It's one of the great Mahayana texts. And the Avatamsaka Sutra it's this huge, big sutra. It's like 1,700 pages with no pictures. It's dense. It's very dense. And personally, I don't know too many people who've read it all the way through. Right? You have to have you have to have nothing to do. Monks can do that. I had the privilege of being able to read it, right? Because I had nothing else to do, so I kind of might as well read it. And also it is in a sense, I mean, this is a bit of an aside, but I really think that if the Avatamsaka Sutra had arisen in a European culture, it would be, and in originally English, like Shakespeare or something like that, it would be considered one of the great literary works of art in human history, right? Because you could think of it, it's not 1,700 pages of instruction. It's 1,700 pages of poetry and kind of hints and illusions, and I don't mean allusions, right? Like they're kind of alluding to, kind of nudges and so on, and it takes a certain kind of interest and involvement to kind of read through it. But fundamentally, the Avatamsaka Sutra is a kind of collation, if you like, of all sorts of different teachings that have been associated with this cultivation of magnanimity and this cultivation of kind of expansive, augmenting capacity towards radical inclusivity. Right? And so this is all kinds of different teachings. And originally, the Avatamsaka Sutra didn't get written. There was this sutra and this sutra and this sutra and this sutra and this sutra, and then they sort of put 3 or 4 of them together over here, and they became a bundle. And then there's a few more over here. And in about 600, AD, somewhere around there in China, right? They started to get all put together into a single text, and it was called the Avatamsaka Sutra. And so it's a kind of in one sense, if you strip away the poetry, an incredibly detailed, the 10 of this and the 50 of that, and it's all in there, right? And it culminates, the end of it, having gone through all the details, the final chapter of the Avatamsaka, which is this glorious 300-page chapter called Entering the Realm of Reality. And you get tiny hints of it all the way through, right? But all the way through the Avatamsaka, every once in a while you hear of this kind of heard about suspected presence, but you're not quite sure who or what they are. And it sounds a bit like, I think they said Samantabhadra, right? And so this kind of name comes up, and you're not quite sure. It's almost like in the Samantabhadra, it's like an archetype. And in the Avatamsaka Sutra, probably in Mahayana in general, the Buddhist world, right, that would understand Mahayana, they say, oh yeah, Samantabhadra is one of the great bodhisattvas, and particularly famous for an absolute hair-raising vow, right, to not rest until he had liberated every single sentient being that was conceivable throughout the entire universe. And it goes on with a kind of page after page of glorious vow. And yet in the Tibetan tradition, Samantabhadra is also referred to as a kind of primordial Buddha nature, Adhi-Buddha. In the Dzogchen and in the Mahamudra teachings, Samantabhadra is the equivalent of Vajradhara. In the Nyingma tradition, you have Samantabhadra. In the Kagyu tradition, you have Vajradhara. They're the same. They're referring to the same thing, right? There's a kind of this unshakable realization. And so the interesting thing is that Samantabhadra is both the fruition of all this work, but Samantabhadra is also the work that gives rise to the fruition. And so, we can, depending on where you are, basically, there is no correct understanding of Samantabhadra. It's where am I in my journey, and so Samantabhadra, suchness is not a bad thing to hang out with on your journey, right? The Dharma Dhatu, right? The total field of all events and meanings, right? Totality, if you like, right? It's not a bad thing to be hanging out with on your journey. And then in the process of hanging out with this on your journey, you might come to realize totality. By hanging out with totality, maybe I get to realize totality, right? By hanging out with magnanimity, right? Developing this extraordinary heart of Mahayana. Okay? And in one of the words for heart that gets translated as heart is chitta. And so another appearance, if you like, of Samantabhadra is just a poetic hint at the mystery of bodhicitta. Right? Which is what? Which is everything that I'm talking about. It's not just this thing, this heart of awakening, like, oh yeah, I've got my bodhicitta. And you can pray for the bodhicitta to arise. Right? Well, if you can pray, it's arising. Right? What you really mean is pray in such a way that allows you to realize and appreciate the magnitude of this arising that's happening. And you go, oh my God, right? You're caught, not like, you don't know what to say. You know, you're no longer on the bank watching the river flow by. You are in the river, you are the river, you're part of the river, you're flowing, and right? So this is a praxis. We don't know where we're going. Do you know where you're going, honestly? Maybe you do, but I don't, in a conventional sense, I haven't got a clue. Well, I do, right? I'm going to be dead. That's about the one thing. It's got that, death, right? That part, and even that I don't actually know. It's only hearsay, but I got a lot of confidence in it. You know what I mean? It's like, I won't really know. Maybe I'll never die. It's like it'd be a drag. So, in this sense, this text that we're going to use as a kind of touch point, right, through our explorations. In one sense, I'd like you to look at this sadhana particularly for those of you that have lots of experience with classical Tibetan sadhanas, to look at this a bit differently. If you don't have a lot of experience, then you don't have to look at it differently. Just try out this way. It's quite common in the classical approach to Tibetan sadhanas to see the sadhana as a one piece, right? It's like the whole thing makes the sadhana, right? And it's divided up into step 1 and step 2 and step 3. And actually, if you have experience with sadhana, you see there's certain steps that are always there. And in fact, we can talk about stages of sadhana, 7 stages of sadhana and so on. And this is kind of characteristic of all the sadhanas. And so, and we have this sense that, just doing the preparation work, that's not it. What's the guts of the sadhana? For some people, the guts of the sadhana is visualizing and doing the mantra, right? And so when you say, have you done the sadhana? Oh, I haven't done the sadhana yet. Translated, I haven't done 100,000 of the mantra, right? Have you done the 100,000 of the mantra? Oh yeah, I've done the sadhana. No, actually you've just muttered this phrase 100,000 times and you might not have entered into the practice at all, right? Because if I'm worried, for example, about doing the practice correctly, or am I being successful in doing this practice, I'm not engaged in praxis. I'm not seeing that, am I being successful in exploring the universe and being transformed through my exploration of the universe? How could you possibly ask anyone that question except yourself? It isn't, it's like, nope, you're not. or yes, you are. Oh, good, I am. What am I? So think of this as like each stage, rather than it being a sequential sadhana, right? I'd like you to look at this sadhana a bit like a kind of fractal hologram, in which each stage, right, is in a sense the whole sadhana. Right? Like you could realize, like in the very first stage, some people would take that as their fundamental form of praxis, and with that yet another presence and realization of Samantabhadra blossoms into the universe. And oh, you mean there was page 4? Oh, I didn't even know there was a mantra. Right? I didn't get to that. Oh, you haven't done the sadhana yet. Right? And another point I want to make too is permission for practicing this sadhana. Right? In the Hinayana mind state, there's a lot of concern about permission, right? Because that's mine and that's yours. And so when you got that, it's like if I think I'm having something that's yours, I have to have permission to have what's yours, because it's not mine. But if you begin to, just dive right in from the very, very beginning and recognize, like I said yesterday, I'm animate, I'm animal, right? everything that I experience arises from this, that my life, my living, and by the same token, mine in relationship with yours, our living, my living is my path of awakening. What other path could I have? Right? That I settle into the sadhana not by diving into some pages on a text, but by settling into the fullness of my living experience. Here. And we had I think even the idea of a hologram is not necessarily communicating to people today, because some people have credit cards with little kind of rainbow things sort of on the surface of the card, and if you kind of move it, it kind of flashes different colors. And kind of the wings of American Express or something, I don't know what, and I've heard that referred to as a hologram, right? And if that's your image of a hologram, then I'm not communicating. Right? And originally, when they first started to develop holograms, and I'm not quite sure exactly when that was, but holograms were kind of newish in 1970 anyway. Not too many of us had really heard or understood them or anything. And in the late 1970s, I'd begun to teach in Ottawa. We had a Dharma house in Ottawa. And some of the students were profs from Carleton University. And one of them ran a holographic lab. And I'd expressed some curiosity about it, so he invited us all to come to the lab to give us this demonstration. And it was quite complex. I mean, nowadays, all that stuff could be probably put in a chip or something, but in those days it was like heavy equipment around the room and big laser source coming here and another laser source coming there, and they crisscross and they shine through a kind of, the best way I can describe it, it looked like a kind of old-fashioned photographic plate, like a negative, and it's kind of a sort of vague shimmering something in the plate. You couldn't make out what it was. And the lights would intersect through that plate, and then behind the plate, seemingly hovering in space, was a little biplane, like old-fashioned two-wing airplane. It just happened to be a hologram of a biplane, right? And we walked around it, and when you walked around it, just as you walk around a real airplane, your vision of what you can see changes. I mean, if you have an ordinary photograph and you walk from here to there, the photograph basically stays the same. You can't have like a door's open there, and if you walk far enough here, you can look on the back of the door in the photograph. It doesn't work. But to a certain degree with the hologram, it was almost like you could walk around the thing, right? So it's like, this is incredibly magical that somehow a three-dimensional object appeared hovering in space, right? But this was not what is really special about the hologram in terms of why I'm using this analogy here. He then said, well, after we'd all had a good look at it and everyone had asked questions and, we'd sort of explored what we were going to do, he was waiting for his chance, he's kind of the big magician. And he took the plate, which was sort of like a plastic film, like a negative, just I don't know what you call it, cellulose kind of surface, right? And he took it out, it was about this big. He took a great big pair of scissors, and he smiled and cut it in half, right through the middle of where we presumed the plane must be. Put it back into the thing, focused the laser light through, and we looked, and the whole plane was still there. Granted, it was a little fuzzier. It wasn't as crisp, because I think that was because there wasn't so much data or something. But the point of the hologram is that each designated point, right, that makes up the picture contains the information that's necessary to construct the whole. right? In this sense, I look at this sadhana as a kind of a hologram, right? And you may find, for example, that we can only go through it in a sense, step by step, in a linear fashion. I mean, ideally, I would come out and give as rich a teaching on every section simultaneously, all at the same time. And you all go, thank you. Because so like all the different levels all happening at once. But when we speak, it's linear. Right? So we do this, but it's very easy to become then deluded by the way we're operating, and you begin to think of it as this linear thing, and after a while, the first part's just the preparation practice. You just skip over that, and get on with the real stuff of visualizing and doing the mantra. I'd like to invite the possibility that each section, right, reverberates with all the other sections, and if, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes you find that working through the sadhana in a sequential fashion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, tremendously rich. It feels really worth doing. I find actually that I'm frequently not quite making it to the end of the first section. It gets too interesting, and I can't be bothered with visualizing anything extra. I mean, this is already too extraordinary what's going on. Okay? And sometimes I find I just leap into the 5th section and I don't bother with the other sections, right? So sometimes you'll find in your praxis, think of this sadhana. I'm going to give you a copy of this morning, and then we'll be referring to it, right, through the retreat. But think of it as a kind of a support for your living exploration, rather than I'm now giving myself to this sadhana and I'm going to fit myself into this sadhana. Can you get a feel for what I'm getting at here? Okay. Yes?
I wrote this down, my question.
Good.
Why do I have to retreat to do this? Is it to name it? Anne spoke about the blessed opportunity of being engaged in her life's business and being in retreat.
Yes.
And I can really resonate with that.
Yeah.
So is this the study to explore new territory or to illuminate this familiar but unconscious territory, place, being?
Both. Because this kind of familiarizing unconscious territory is always new. This moment's now new. We're always living just a few steps lagged in the past, or a few steps ahead of it. We're rarely just right where we are. Right? And why do we have to do it in retreat? Well, Anne sort of close enough that she can pop up here, have the class, and go back to work. You don't. Right? And I'm not going to go to Anne's house. So it's sheer selfishness on my part. Right?
I think that I resonated with the opportunity of that when my life isn't somewhere else.
Yeah.
My life is here.
Yeah. And as in a sense, like this, the reason why, how can I put it? The reason why I feel this work is valid or, important is because we are, there's the possibility that we might glimpse true meditation, and then we might actually start to become familiar with the naturalness of it. And when we're very familiar with the naturalness of it, it's with us everywhere. When we're not familiar with it, we have to be in special locations, either being reminded by a period for meditation, or a shrine or a temple, or a tanka, or things that can remind us. But that's because, in a sense, we're not familiar enough with it. It hasn't really become part of my family. It's a kind of an add-on. I like it. It's really good. I value it, and so on. But if I'm away for a long time, I forget it. Right? It becomes so familiar that you couldn't forget it. It's as familiar as your nose or your lips or your cheeks or your, like it's, you don't say, well, I'll leave the cheeks behind. and an awful lot of what we call practice, if you like, is actually, people say, oh, I'm practicing Dharma, but in a certain sense what they're doing is they're maybe a more accurate description is they're struggling like crazy to find out what Dharma is, right? Because in the praxis of our living, I'm not struggling like crazy to be the praxis of my own living. I don't, even when I'm having a struggle, it's not a struggle to have a struggle. Oh, it's really, I don't think I can keep this struggle up. I'm going to have to relax. No, it's an effortless struggle. It's effortless agony, right? I'm just totally miserable and I can do it just like that, Right? There's a sense like Samantabhadra is sometimes described as all good or totally positive, right? In the sense that, and this is for sure my way of interpreting it, because I haven't come across too many interpretations this way before, but in the the idea of positive and negative in a kind of being totally positive and never having negativity, it just doesn't kind of fit with me. I can't figure that one out at all, right? And yet by the same token, I have a huge kind of intuitive sense that that in these teachings, in this tradition, there's something which is true. So now I've got this kind of paradox, right? Because they seem to be saying something which doesn't feel true, and yet my intuition tells me that they're onto something. So then I go, well, actually, maybe I'm not quite understanding what they're saying, right? And so I thought of old-fashioned photography, before digital photography came along. And so you would have a negative and you would have a positive photography. Yep. This is not a moral thing, like the positive in photography is that's good and moral, but actually the negatives are all immoral. They're kind of like missing the point. The point is like the negative is in a sense a picture of what's not there. This is not exactly it, because remember when color photography came along, and so, but you still had to develop your pictures, right? Your negative would sort of sit there, and it's different. Like all the colors are kind of reversed, right? The greens are reds, and it's not quite right. It's kind of what's not there, and then by doing the right thing, you get what is there. That's what you normally say. Ah, that's what you look like. You got a red hat, not a blue hat. And so if you look at it, you see an awful lot of people focus a lot of attention in their life on what is not there. Oh, I'm not kind enough, or I'm not disciplined enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not, and so how can I get smart, which I don't have, but I want to get? And so between regretting what we've got that we don't want to have and yearning to get what we feel we don't have, we live a life involved with what is not there. Negative. Samantabhadra is a way of unfolding which is becoming interested in life that is there. Positive. And when you look at how many news reports do we have that have nothing to do with a critique of what's there or an announcement of what might be? Right? Culturally, we are hugely engaged with what's not there. And yet the path of liberation and the path of awakening is the path of having the increasing capacity to embrace and engage with what is here. This is Samantabhadra. And so, in a sense, retreat is really a time to, it's a war term. Like when you're I mean, you never hear of, like, we're winning the battle, right? In a minute, we're going to conquer them completely. We better retreat. No. Nobody's retreating, right? You're going to, like, retreat is, we're losing the battle. We're going to better to run away and live to fight another day, let's retreat, right? Sound the bells and we all retreat, right? And so, where do you retreat? You retreat to a place where you can regather your energies, so you can fight another day. And so, in retreat, we're in a sense retreating from the kind of momentum of incapacity to be with what is here, and a kind of hypnosis into somehow validating that the real universe is essentially something that isn't here. That's, by the way, why all these teachings end up being transcendental teachings. Because we want transcendence, right? We don't want to be here with what is here. We want to kind of transcend. It's part of that not here. Samantabhadra is not transcendental. Samantabhadra, I suppose you'd have to say, is just utter immanence. And then of course nobody's interested anymore. Oh, I didn't even need to come for that. I could have just stayed at home. So it's like creating a space in retreat. We create either along with other people or by ourselves. We're creating a space that is having less kind of reminders of thinking in terms of what's not there, engaging with what's not there, more opportunity to appreciate and investigate and become familiar with exploring what it means to live as this cresting wave of now, right? Like what could this mean, and how might this change the way I interact with others, right? With the idea that then eventually you can come to the advanced practice, which is no more retreat. Generally, I'm just going to read from the text here. Samantabhadra represents all aspects of bodhicitta, both relative and absolute. From this perspective, the essence of Samantabhadra as bodhicitta manifests through a spectrum of maturation. Right? So let's kind of think of a spectrum of maturings on the journey of a human being. Okay? It begins with aspiration. Right? It's kind of the aspiration to inclusiveness, to however you might express it, to compassion, and this is very much marked by what in some traditions we call the stage of accumulation. And so we're accumulating skills in focus and attentiveness and healing and dealing with difficulties and working with others and so on. We're accumulating lots and lots of different skills. And the child needs to accumulate skills to be a successful, mature adult. Right? There's no way around this. Right? And so there's this kind of aspiration accumulation. And then this is followed by, right, instead of bodhicitta as aspiration, like I'm doing this to awaken for the sake of all sentient beings. May I awaken for the sake of all sentient. This is aspiration bodhicitta, right? You're working at it, right? How do you go about doing that? Well, learn how to meditate and be more sort of decent in your interactions with others and help others and study Prajnaparamita and whatever it is, right? There's the kind of accumulating skills. And then gradually we come to bodhicitta not so much as aspiration. It doesn't go, oh, now I'm finished with the aspiration, now I go on to the next one. You find that your aspiration is not so much the dominant thing, hoping for something, but it's more application bodhicitta. So now instead of like hoping for the bodhicitta, right, for Samantabhadra, you're kind of applying Samantabhadrahood, right, bodhisattvaship, right, applying that. And this is sometimes called the stage of preparation or integration. And what it is, it's called preparation from the point of view that it's preparing us to really see the what's actually going on, the positive in that sense, rather than the what's not going on, right? So that's preparation that way. And the way we prepare is by integrating the talents that we have accumulated, right? So it's kind of like there's an enriching of our being. And, in a sense, we're all be able to relate to different stages of this maturing process in different ways. And you can only work at the level that is relevant to you. It's meaningless to think, oh, well, I'd rather work at a higher level or something, or, the next level. I mean, it's sort of like just the 2-year-old or the 1-year-old, right? I don't think I want to bother to crawl. And I can't be bothered to learn to talk. I just want to be a professor of English literature. Right? Well, you don't. You got to accumulate a few skills, and then you've got all these skills. You can read, you can write, and you can talk to others, and you can fill in a text form. But this still isn't quite professor of English literature, right? And maybe you know everything about English, but you can't get on with anyone else, so nobody wants to hire you in the department. Or, you're to integrate our skills so that they're workable. And then we come to what we call the maturation stage, right? So you've got aspiration stage of bodhicitta, you've got application, and then you've got maturation, right? So now it's not so much that you're just applying or learning the details, but you're maturing in your living of this. This is more and more becoming your life and your living rather than a technique that you practice. And this is associated with what we sometimes call the stages of seeing and the stages of familiarization. And in the stage of seeing, this is where there's just like a very clear knowing of being the universe in the act of clearly knowing, being the universe in the act of clearly knowing, being the universe in the act of clearly knowing, being the universe. Right? I mean, I'm speaking in a very kind of general sense. This is like knowing the Dharma Dhatu. This is a glimpse, if you like, of what we have, these fabulous words like Dharmakaya, the nature of mind, the true nature of being, suchness. There's a moment of seeing. And interestingly enough, at that point, in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions, which are terms that I can use for me meaningfully, it feels like this is what I've spent my whole Buddhist life working within. It's after seeing that meditation begins. Obviously, in application and preparation and integration, people are meditating like crazy, but actually, they're trying to meditate, they're learning to meditate, and in that act of seeing, you see that there is no meditation other than the universe in the act of knowing itself as a praxis, right, as a transforming creative praxis. And this becomes, then meditation is the act of becoming familiar with this. It's like it kind of becomes, at the beginning it's like a little glimpse, and then you go a year without it, and then another little glimpse or something, but gradually it becomes stabilized. And this becomes, in a sense, just the way you tend to live. And there are skills in this, and part of the skills is how to live in this whilst engaging in the world with others. And so the stages of meditation are also connected with what we call the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva, right? Which are a kind of an expanding capacity to rest in this knowing in more and more complex situations involving wider and wider range of beings. And in the Avatamsaka, it's kind of mind-boggling when they describe the 10 stages, because they say, well, You have the stage of seeing, and then you're able to help 100 people and understand 100 this and so on is all 100. And then the second stage is like 1,000. And then the third stage is 10,000. And then the fourth stage is 100,000. And then the fifth stage is 1,000,000. And by the time you get to the 10th stage, it's like a Google times a Google. You know, it's just like mind-numbingly massive number of sentient beings, right? Without departing for a moment from this, and to see the suffering and not to be crushed by it, and to be not crushed by the suffering and yet never to stop being engaged with it. There's both. You know, like this is not easy to bring about, right? In the sense that it's rare. Right? So this is the kind of subject matter that we have here. As we go along during the few weeks together, I'm sure you'll get a richer and richer sense of what we mean by Samantabhadra, but I'm just trying to give right now a big picture of how I'm seeing this sadhana. I'm not seeing this sadhana as a practice of a visualization practice of a Tibetan deity. Right? It's broader than that. Any thoughts or questions, and then we'll have a little stretch, and then I want to get to the second. I told you this would be long, but the mornings won't always be this long. I'd like to then just begin to touch on the first section so that everyone feels they've got something to actually work with. Yeah.
Of all the different potential frameworks in which to approach this work, in the time that you had choosing to create this framework, why was this the framework that you chose to create in exploration?
Because if I'm hearing you right, I mean, as I say, this is in a sense only distantly relevant to you, right? But in other words, like my passions and interests are only distantly relevant to your unfolding. And so this is really a reflection of my passion and interest. And that is that I have read the Avatamsaka, I have studied the Mahayana texts, a lot of them. And Samantabhadra is a figure, if you like, that comes up again and again and again, right? And in the teachings of Longchenpa, who's been massively influential in my life, Longchenpa is the kind of symbolic ultimate image, if you like, of full realization that he refers to all the time. So of course, for me, I'm kind of curious. And it's interesting too that in the Tibetan tradition, for years, I really wanted a sadhana of Samantabhadra. And I looked all over. Actually, there aren't any. There's no sadhanas of Samantabhadra, like in terms of texts. Why? Because Samantabhadra is, in a sense, the whole thing. You just can't do it, right? And so as my there was a time when I had this aspiration, because I've had a lot of involvement with Tibetan forms of sadhana. I wanted to write a sadhana for myself that had no deity. Could I write a sadhana that doesn't have a figure in it, right? But that contains everything that the sadhana has in it. And for years I kind of worked on this. It was my private little thing, right? And then gradually what has emerged here came into being. But it was obvious that I was able to use you'll see when you look in the text that the description of Samantabhadra is unlike any description of a deity that you'll come across in any of the traditional texts. Because it doesn't talk about, this being sits here and that being sits there, or they're holding this implement or that implement. It talks about qualities of your own being, right? And blurs them poetically with this kind of movement and so on. And so hence this sadhana. And that's why I'm not interested particularly in teaching Samantabhadra. I'm interested in sharing what I think is of interest to everyone, which is a kind of glimpse at a process of enlargement and magnanimous making, radical inclusivity stance, right? And how do we talk about it? Well, we could talk about it with these kind of just abstract concepts, or we could also, one of the beautiful things about the Tibetan tradition is they take things which are just unpin-downable and they image them in terms of a human being. And actually we can relate to that because we're human. So even though Chenrezig sits there as kind of strange color, nobody's chalk white. It's something, you're anemic or something, you know, rush Chenrezig to intensive care. Right? And God, he's got these growths coming out. Normally you only have 2 arms, right? And he's got 4 arms. Surgery, it will fix you. We'll heal Chenrezig. But we use these images because the beauty of it is potentially the possibility to hint that these vast abstract concepts like the Dharmakaya and the Dharmadhatu and so forth are not separate from embodiment of being, an actual being somewhere in relationship with others. This, I believe, is extraordinarily valuable and important. In a sense, all this work could be presented in a totally different way, right? And I'm busy working on a book that presents it in a totally different way. I think it presents exactly the same work in a totally different way. But I can't, just as I said before, right? I can't dump it all at the same time. So if we said, oh, well, let's look at the work from this perspective of Mahayana and Buddhism and Samantabhadra and so forth, and we could look at this from a point of view of contemplative science and a way that doesn't use this particular imagery or language at all. But I feel, for me, it resonates exactly the same qualities of understanding. So next March, I'm aspiring to give a retreat at Wangapeka on the other one. It's a little sales pitch. You know, this whole path, if you like, of, I talked about stage of accumulation, stage of integration, stage of seeing, stage of familiarization. And by the way, the last stage, after sufficient familiarization, you come to the stage of no more practice, Buddhahood, right? Which means that, in other words, no more practice in the way I was critiquing. You're not trying to develop anything anymore. Right now you're just totally engaged in participating in the creativity of the universe. It's not to say there isn't more. Buddha's got lots to do, right? And there are all kinds of texts from different traditions which go into various degrees of detail on, well, what do they feel within the Mahayana tradition, within Tibetan teaching? These qualities are valuable to develop, and then this one, and then this happens in this one. And this one, the treasury of precious qualities, right, in the Nyingma tradition, right? And this one has a huge extensive commentary from Kanjar Rinpoche, who was an elderly terma finder, right? He created, in a sense, like in the Tibetan tradition, when a text gets created fresh and new, they don't like to say it was created because it sounds like it's Mickey Mouse. So they say, oh, it was a terma, it was found, right? And he brought forth a lot of texts And he was one of the first Tibetan teachers to have Western students. And it was just through the good fortune that, I was traipsing along on Namgyal's coattails, carrying the bag, right, that I suddenly ended up in this room with Kanja Rinpoche and having all this transmission and so forth. And so these ones, if you're interested in this kind of thing, in the detail, because we're not going to go into all this detail, but I found it interesting. And in fact, not only that, but there are others. There's Jeweled Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa. Covers the same stuff, only from Kharju tradition. This is Nyingma tradition. Samantabhadra will pop up in here. Samantabhadra will hardly pop up at all in Gampopa's work, because what pops up there is Vajradhara, but actually they're the same. Just different ways of speaking about the same thing. So the text begins in a very complex and esoteric fashion. It's called preparation. To cultivate the sadhana of Samantabhadra, to cultivate the praxis of suchness, to cultivate the praxis of Mahayana, to cultivate the praxis of total positivity. Right? This is that's why I did the big preamble, right? So that we could just get to the preparation, right? To cultivate this, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture, right? And it's quite often, and I talk about rearranging oneself, because, to me, an arrangement always involves more than one thing. Like, you hardly ever think of an arrangement of a singularity. Do you understand what I mean? I could arrange everything here, and sort of you make a nice arrangement by whatever criterion, maybe a geometric arrangement or a temporal arrangement or a color arrangement. You have your criteria of how you arrange it, right? But it means that you have a sense of, and so arrange yourself. Of course, this is a bit of a challenge, because you can't do this unless you know what yourself is. That's what it says, arrange yourself. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, I got that, arrange yourself. And they go like this, And yet, really, do you really think that this is myself? No, arrange yourself, right? And so this is like inviting question of like the various components of movement and physiology and mentality and memory and so on that make up my being, right, in a comfortable posture. Right? And we forget the comfortable posture, right? It's with, right? And forte means strong, right? And actually comfortable is a comfortable posture is a posture that supports you feeling strong, right? Not rigid, right? We're not just talking about, don't limit it to sitting in the sevenfold posture of Virochana or something like that. I'm not negating that. If that's a comfortable posture, wonderful, right? But you realize that when I'm feeling strong, that has nothing to do with precluding movement. I don't mean posture like a pose, right? It's like there's constant adjustment that's taking place, right? When I'm not comfortable, I'm kind of getting tense. I'm in the right posture, the comfortable posture. Any comfortable posture held too long becomes uncomfortable. Okay? So actually to arrange yourself in a comfortable posture requires just a continuum of valuing being in a comfortable posture and noticing the posture, the arrangement of beingness that you are, and then doing whatever you can do to facilitate it feeling more fluid, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? This is the comfortable posture. Without doing this, this is the first step. This is a hologram. You do this one and bang, you just fall right into Samantabhadra. In a sense, it's so simple, but it's too simple. Okay? Let's get on to the sadhana. That's why this is the part I haven't quite got beyond. I'm finding this is like really so interesting and so engaging, right? Like I'm constantly recognizing that I'm sort of taken, and this posture is not strengthening of my being. And you see, it gets worse. It gets even worse, because you begin to realize that your being isn't separate from the relationships that are your being. And so I find that it's not comfortable for me to have a sense of you not being comfortable. I like to, in a sense, to arrange myself in a comfortable posture. I mean, is that to say it's got nothing to do with you? It's it's difficult to talk about, but I mean, myself is relationship within and inside my skin and beyond my skin with others. It's just this huge configuration of relationships. Mental, emotional, physical, whatever you want to call them, down to atomic levels, and we can do a science thing with it, or however you want to look at it, but they're all somehow like strengthening, like they're mutually supporting. What is a comfortable posture? This is a question that you're invited to hold this question, not to do it. If you know what I mean, like the normal way of looking at this is like, oh, I'm supposed to take up a posture that's comfortable, right? That's what I have to do a comfortable posture. But really, this starts to really, strangely enough, or miraculously enough, or wondrously enough, we begin to approach a comfortable posture through being curious about what such a thing could be. And oddly enough, that's how it comes into being, right? By getting interested in it, right? So, okay, what kind of practice are you going to do? Well, you have to do 8 hours a day on the cushion and 3 hours of walking, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then you're gonna... No, all you do, right? Your practice is 24 hours a day for as long as you're conscious, continuously arranging yourself in a comfortable posture, right? With the aspiration that this will help you cultivate the praxis of suchness. Right? Because how on earth can I learn what it means to be in this fluid relating without fluidly relating? Right? I could speak about this for longer, right? You think of think of a posture of body. You fill in the details a bit. You want to have a comfortable physiology presence. Right? So sometimes I've discovered, and many of you will have noticed it over the last few days, that just right now, comfortable posture for me is like vaguely slumped. With a nice cushion behind my lumbar, right? And I kind of wriggle around a lot. I don't kind of sit too still, right? And this is comfortable. This is from here, because then when I'm feeling stronger, when I'm strong, I can then magnanimity flows from strength. It doesn't flow out of weakness. Right? A sense of magnanimous, this natural generosity. Well, I don't know if I can't afford it. I don't have enough time. It comes out of strength. Right? So please see if you can recognize that what we're talking about here in the preparation is something which, in a certain sense, is like extraordinarily profound. It's not just a beginner thing. it's the whole shooting match. It's almost like to cultivate the sadhana of Samantabhadra, right? Arrange your relating in the world of body, speech, and mind in such a fashion that you're perfectly in tune, because there lies your sense of ultimate strength. End of sadhana. Yes.
My weakness is there as well.
Sorry?
My weakness is there when I'm arranging myself in a comfortable place.
Yes. I'm not quite following what you're saying.
The totality of the aspects of how I am, my history, me, relationship with other, with which I have no control over other people, places and things.
Yes.
What was shared before in the circle about the polluted river, the tears, the blood.
Yeah, but there is no such thing as weakness. There's only strength. Like there's the weakness, the strength is in the ability to be present for what is, and the weakness is in the compulsion to not be present in what is. Right? So in one sense, maybe I agree with you, and in another sense, maybe I don't agree with you. I'm not quite sure. It depends on how you're meaning this, but because it's in a sense, when I'm talking about what strengthens you, right? I mean, for example, I've had lots of very good experience in the last 4 years about finding a sense of strength in situations that I've discovered many people consider to be emotionally catastrophic. You have, what's a kind of aggressive cancer, and you meet with lots of other people with cancer. And I realized that it seemed like the way I related to it was different than a lot of the people related to their cancers. And basically there's a general tendency to find the whole thing interesting. And in that moment of finding it interesting, that makes me feel strong. When I feel interested, I feel strong. When I feel disinterested and withdrawing or defensive or something, I feel weaker. And it's just the way this is how I feel it is, right? And so, I could say, well, accepting that, the statistical prognosis for this situation isn't good. And meanwhile, just finding the whole thing quite like a blessing. I didn't feel weakened by this, but I was accepting the weakness of my being, which was it was full of cancer. And now, the thought, my father had I had an interaction with my father that was interesting, just to finish this point, was he had a kind of catastrophic heart attack at one stage in his life, and then for a long time he lived with a sense that he could die at any minute. And we had a relationship such that we didn't see each other very often, maybe once every 2 years for a couple of hours. And every time we'd see each other, we'd find we'd been thinking similar things and doing, he was a contemplative person. He wrote poetry and philosophically inclined. And so it was possible for me to ask him, how is he relating to death? And one day, one of the last times we had this conversation, shortly before he died, I said, well, how are you relating to death? And he said, well, actually, he said, I've only just realized that I might not die. Right? And it's terrifying. Right? He said, before it was like so easy to live. I could just drop dead any moment, and so it didn't matter. And he was really equanimous about it. But now it's like, what on earth am I going to do with my life? And then it turned, he went up and died. Right? So this thought came to mind before I got this diagnosis the other day, in which case it looks like, oh my God, I might have a life, right? This is my chance to change the Hearn karma. And so not only can I find that it's interesting to be under this kind of threat of death, that I might even be able to find it strengthening to the fact that I have no idea what's going on. It might go on for a long time and I have no idea what I'm going to do. Right? And perhaps I suspect that my experience is not too uncommon, but I also suspect that my experience is not the only way of experiencing this. You kind of only know within your frame of experience, but I think that many people will find that when they feel tremendously interested in what's going on, that is strengthening for them. Their body's falling apart doesn't mean their back doesn't hurt, or doesn't mean, we're talking about strengthening of your being, not strengthening of your lumbar or strengthening of this emotion or that emotion. And so, of course, there's space for the so-called weakness, and of course there's space for the so-called, but in the context that I'm speaking about, it doesn't feel weak. It's just acknowledging that, yeah, this is the stuff, but there's a kind of, probably an increasing quality of serenity with it, like an acceptance of it, which you could always critique and go, it could be better, but you can know with confidence it's happening sometimes when you look back earlier and you see yourself 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier. It's just kind of a theoretical thing of how I might have been with this situation the way I was then, now, and you realize, no, I'm being with it a bit differently. This is like, right? And so my aspiration is to die with tremendous strength. I mean, it's not my only aspiration, but in the sense that we're talking about, that's a not meaningless thing to say. Right? But in the end, you die. Okay, you lose. But I don't really have a sense of someone who's going Murphy or something who's going to say you lose, in the end. You do everything you can and so on, and in the end you die. But so to practice, right, to cultivate this, and by the way, to cultivate something is to cultivate this praxis. Right? We're not just practicing, but we're cultivating a praxis. And so like with gardening, if you're going to be able to cultivate a garden, you have to plant seeds, you have to water, you have to weed, you have to know how to observe. Right? The gardener who doesn't observe their garden and learn from the particular garden doesn't develop into a good gardener. You need to develop patience. Right? Because things don't grow instantly when you want them to. Right? The things have their own timing. Right? So the cultivating of this praxis is something which is a multi-skilled thing. Right? Maybe part of this is like to cultivate this praxis of Samantabhadra. Arrange yourself. Right? In a comfortable posture, in a comfortable posture. And this is really raising the question, what is comfort for me? Is it mere kind of absence of pain? Or is it more than that? Right? I'm just saying. Then, right, if you've done that, or maybe you get bored of just doing that and you want to do something else anyway, right, then making friends with your breathing. And I'll say a lot more about this as we go along, but just the sense of, many people have arrived here from relatively busy schedules. A number of you have expressed feeling tired and so forth, right? Like just like kind of a continuum of encouraging a comfortable posture, right? And making friends with the sensations of your body engaged in this complex, rhythmic, physiological dance we call breathing. Not watching some sensation at the tip of your nose, Making friends with your breathing, invite your entire body, brain, mind, community to settle into a place of pristine stillness and vibrantly awake presence. And that is actually truly enough. Right? That's Samantabhadra. Okay? To cultivate this, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture, making friends with your breathing, invite your entire body, brain, mind community to settle into a place of pristine stillness and vibrantly awake presence. Right? Of course that's in the midst of whatever's happening, because there is no other midst to be in. It's no option. And this is not different than what's talked about, right? The kind of one hand, the deep blue stillness and the brilliant white awakeness, right? And they're in union. They're just there. You don't know, visualizing stuff, mantraing. You don't need that. I mean, it might be nice to do, right, for some people. But that's not what it is, right? This is it. This text is a little bit changed from the text that we used last year, and it'll probably be a little bit changing for a while until I get tired of it. Now some of you are going to be curious and read the whole text today. We haven't looked at it yet, and you're jumping in prematurely, and we haven't had the special permission, and so on. So you're not allowed to do that yet, and so of course your curiosity will take you where it takes you, but I would really urge you to see if you can make that first section now, the preparation, as your that's your working place. Never mind the rest of it. Just like settling in this. It's got nothing to do with the text, really. I mean, settling into a comfortable posture and making friends with your entire being in the process of breathing it's not a Tibetan thing, right? It's not a sadhana thing, right? It's just a darn sensible, healthy thing, right? And so, right, see if you can, it may help for some of you to make yourself schedules, right? Some sort of rough schedule. So, get up in the morning and do this, and then have breakfast, and then come to class, and then go and do that, and then do this, and so on. Some of you may find that the best thing right now is just to have absolutely zero schedule and just flow with the kind of spontaneity of what's happening. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing schedule, do this. If you're doing not schedule, do this. Right? In the flow of my living. Right? Like that. And then each day we'll add a little bit more. Okay? And I think you'll start to see gradually how they flow in and through each other, and there isn't sort of stage 4 isn't more advanced than stage 2. It's just different, right? And sometimes think of each one of these sections. There's 13 sections in this text, and if you think of each one of these sections is an aid, as a support for deepening into the mystery of what is. Right? And so, I feel supported by this, and then another day I feel supported by that, and right. And sometimes I feel supported by all of it, and sometimes I feel supported by sequences of it. Right? There's a kind of a fluidity there, but within this, in the way that we might, 3 weeks actually is not enough to go into this text. It's actually quite huge what's compacted in it. We need about that much time. It's hinted at in there, right? So we can kind of take it, depending on, I don't mean that if you haven't studied this, you can't get this. What I mean is that if you have studied this, then this text will be referring to this. And if you haven't studied this text will be referring to what you have studied. It refers to your life and your living. And I think that's it for this morning. Any last thoughts or observations or questions? Or
What arising is his about weakness, and he's saying the state of seeing and engaging with suffering without being affected with, something like that.
More serene. I don't know anything about engaging with extreme suffering without being affected by it. I don't have any experience of that, so I can't talk about that. Right? But I can talk about being with really difficult situations and not being crushed by that to the point of, for over a long period, right? So the in a sense, like, you walk into a very difficult situation and it smashes you down and it takes you a year to get back on your feet. And then you're gradually making progress and you walk into a difficult situation that smashes you down, takes you 6 months to get back on your feet. And then you walk into a difficult situation that smashes you down, it takes you 1 month to get back on your feet. And then, a day, and then an hour. And in a sense, like the Buddhism's full of these kind of little horrible criterion for success in the practice. They said, well, the complete and utter success in the practice is when you can get smashed off your feet and then return to your balance within 3 breaths. But that's a pretty high aspiration. I haven't quite got there, right? And the other thing is that the kind of depth of your confidence in life and living is strong enough that that your confidence isn't shattered in the shattering, right? Yeah, you feel. There's a lot of just absolutely tragic, horrific situations in the world. There's also lots of situations where we have no idea what we can do. I remember one, I can't even remember what the difficult situation was, I just remember the resolution, right? And it was just like I was struggling with a situation that was just like, really, I didn't know how to move. It felt like I moved this way, it wouldn't work. If I moved that way, it wouldn't work. Anything I did was not going to work. And I'm not really into this praying to deities number. It's not my thing. Just don't do that, And all of a sudden, I'm going, Chandrisi, what am I going to do? I was sign of my desperation. I was incredibly desperate. And then to my kind of relieved shock, I got an answer. Right? It was sort of like, the thought came into my mind, do nothing. Well, I didn't know what to do. So don't do anything. Be comfortable in that, right? Or learn to rest in that. Make friends with not knowing what to do, right? And amazingly, in the making friends with not knowing what to do, something's already changing because that wasn't there before. And then oddly enough, a kind of a sense of what the next step might be can maybe come up. I'm not saying that's an answer to every situation. I'm just giving an example of how we can sometimes feel so clobbered. We're just kind of, there's a desperation. Where do I go with that? And where's the confidence that could hear my own wisdom saying do nothing and go, thanks. It's almost like, thanks for reminding me what I knew, but I'd kind of forgotten. Right? So that there's a certain level of your being that of this confidence, a much shorter, the Avatamsaka Sutra is, pith Mahayana text, but an equally pith Mahayana text is a micro text almost, and it's called The Awakening of Faith. That's the English translation of it. But actually it's the awakening of faith in Mahayana, in magnanimity, in this kind of great vehicle that in which everyone is interconnected and we're all involved in this, right? And the realization, if you like, is just to have, it's called the awakening of faith or confidence, Sadhana, right? It's a sense of this deep kind of trust, and so we may lose touch with that, and it takes a year to discover that again, and then we lose touch with it. It takes 6 months to rediscover it again. You know what I mean? And then a day, and then an hour, and then we generally. I find now I don't lose touch with it for too long. I lose touch with it all the time, continuously. Every day I'm losing touch with it. Every day I'm rediscovering it, right? So, as Rinpoche said, it doesn't, the problem or the thing is not how many times you lose the plot, but how fast you can remember the plot after you've lost it. So, and then it starts to feel more of a continuity. This is kind of my default setting, so to speak, is to be generally to find what's going on interesting. This is my default setting for difficulties. Right? It hasn't always been. Right? There was a time when it was very much a kind of an aspiration, but it wasn't the default setting. My default setting was worry. Right? My mother used to call me a worry wart. I later on found out it was projection. Right? But things can change. I look back at myself at 20 and I can't, it's just like impossible. It's peculiar. I figure I probably, conventionally speaking, existed as 20-year-old. But it doesn't feel like, I can't comprehend how that got to this, because it's so different. And yet not different. So, I hope that's good enough for now. By the power of these wholesome activities, may our lives be rich with awakening. Living thus, may we abandon all unwholesomeness. Through this endless journeying mystery of life unfolding in all its dimensions and stages of maturity, may we help all beings to realize their true nature. I got tired of crossing the ocean of the suffering of the world, right? Let's help all beings to realize their true interbeing nature. Sarva Mangalam.